begin our introductions. First, I want to just start by saying that Maine Summer Camps, this challenging time, is trying to provide information to help you in decision making, as well as how to proceed forward with what decisions you have made. And so Maine Summer Camps takes no position as far as what's the right decision for this summer 2020 in light of the virus and COVID-19. But that we want to be a source of information for you and support. So please know that that's where we're coming from, and thrilled that Bob once again has agreed to be here with us today. This is part one of a two-part webinar series, if you want to call it that. And today we are focusing on that decision that you may be considering or have made about suspending your 2020 season. Our future session will be focused on the opening of camp and what that might look like in relation to supporting campers and staff from that perspective. So I can't think of a better person to have on our team right now. From a perspective of preparing for camp and the decisions that we're faced with right now. Bob is so well respected, so experienced in camp and in working with children and staff and with the camp directors. So we are very fortunate to have him here and sharing his expertise and guidance today. Thank you, Bob, for being with us.
Well, thank you, Kat. And I have to say it's a privilege to be here. As all of you know, I have a deep connection to camp and also to Maine summer camps. And it's primarily because of all the good that you do for so many kids around the country and frankly, even around the world. So with that, I'd like to get started. And I want to say a few words before I actually get into the main part of the program, because my intention with this two-part webinar series that Kat mentioned is to help you think, best about how you can deal with whatever you decide, right? So one of the things about camp directors is you have to be planners. You have to really be thinking. And I'm not here to try to influence your decision one way or the other. I think every camp has to make their own decision using the best available information at the time. We know that information is changing, daily. We also know that ACA and the CDC have, been working with a private company that's frankly just down the road from my office, ironically, to put out guidelines about, what you would need to put in place and be able to practice as protocols if you decide to open. Those aren't really sort of finished yet. But I want to get back to, so in terms of available information, that information is changing. But I also know there's some chatter out there about how individual camps are thinking about this decision or looking at their options. And I'd like to address that briefly before I get into the main part of the program. So this is a huge decision, right? Frankly, I don't envy you that decision. It's huge. It's huge for you, for your families, for your camper families, for your own personal family. And it's a decision that every director and owner has to make for themselves, right? It's not something someone can tell you do. It's something you have to decide for yourself. And, the decision carries the huge burden of responsibility for the safety of both your staff and other people's children, right? You know that. And I think other people need to give each other, all of you need to give each other and yourselves credit for being child advocates. You're going to do what you think you can reasonably do, if you can do it based on the information that you have. And you have to understand that not everybody's going to be in the same place. People have different resources. People have different histories. People have different available to them. They have different circumstances, right? There are many dimensions to this. And, in terms of also your sense of purpose, like what you do for a living, your livelihood, the health and safety of others. So there's a lot that has to go into the mix here. And if you're taking your time with this decision, or you have taken your time with this decision, it's not a wonder, right? And I have to say, in times like this, when the stakes are high and emotions are raw, because they are. I mean, for all of us, by the way. I mean, look at me. I just cried, and I haven't even gotten into the program yet. So fasten your seatbelts. But, it's important that we respect ourselves and one another. The final decisions that each camp has to make are really ones you have to make for yourself, the best information available to you, right? Every camp has its own unique set of circumstances. We can't, and if I'm losing my connection here, I apologize. So I'm going to slow down. We can't control the virus, right? It's here. That's a reality. We can't control, in some ways, the economic or social environment that virus has momentarily created. It's here and it's happening. What we can control is our attitude, right? And also how we respond and how we practice respect for ourselves and one another, right? So I want all of us to resist the impulse to judge ourselves. Like, am I not doing enough if I decide not to open? That's not fair. You're making the right decision for you and your camp families. And not every camp is going to come out in the same place on this. So I wanted to say that there are a few truths, all right? That burden of responsibility for the safety of your staff and your kids has to be made at some level, okay? A lot of people I've talked to have privately said to me privately, a lot of camp people, and I'm talking about camp people from around the United States, right? In the Carolinas, down in Georgia, Alabama, in California, in Minnesota, in Michigan. I've been talking to camp people all around the country, and many of them are privately saying, gosh, if the state makes the decision, it takes the burden off of me. In some ways, of course, I'd love to run, but if I have doubts about it, wouldn't it be great if the state just did it for me and I wouldn't have to have that burden on me? If the states, and it may be a state-by-state decision, give the green light, if each state gives the green light, once they do, that burden gets passed on to you, right? Then you've got to, if you open, that every camper parent, and every camper family is going to make that decision based on their own comfort level, what they think is best for them and their kids, right? And by the way, every staff member has to do that. So I want to share something with you that's personal. I'm 70 years old. I love being 70, frankly. It's wonderful. Because now I make a few fewer mistakes, and I actually once in a while actually feel like I know what I'm doing, right? It's wonderful. Hope you all get there. And if you've gotten there and passed me, I think you know what I'm talking about. But that puts me in the high risk category. I also have an underlying condition. I have Crohn's disease. Right? It's a sleeping tiger. Thank goodness I'm one of the, lucky people for whom, my Crohn's disease is in remission. It's sleeping. And I know when the doctor told me, put that tiger up. And that tiger would not be something I would want to tangle with. So I have made the decision that I cannot really go out in public and come to camp, right? And be in front of you until there's the vaccine, because I can't risk it. And frankly, Bob Ditter doesn't want to be an experiment. Let's get the COVID and see what happens. Not doing that, right? And even though I would rather be at your camp is not going to want the reputation of, we were the ones that took out Bob, right? Nobody wants that, right? So, I wanted to say that, there's a lot of gravity here, and there's a lot that we have to think about. And I want us all to give ourselves respect and a little compassion, right? So that maybe we don't come out in the same place, but we all have things that we are carrying that this virus forces us to think about and look at. So I want to just talk about, now that we're going to get into the meat of this first webinar. If you decide to close, I want to give you a kind of a guideline for a deeper, more effective way of communicating. This is something, by the way, that's useful in all communication, and it will be especially important in this one, all right? The second thing is some thoughts about what are you going to say to your camper families, your campers, if you decide not to operate this summer. Like, what is it? How do you say that? How do you craft that statement? What is going to be balanced, sensitive? How do you kind of approach that? And also some thoughts about what you say to your staff, because I think you need to treat them as a separate, they're separate stakeholders, they're separate, and I think you need to talk to them separately. And I want to leave you with some tips that you can talk to your parents about, because if you decide to close, parents are going to have to obviously deal with the disappointment of their own kids. And it gives you an opportunity to give them something that they can do with their kids, should you be, and they be in that situation. So the first thing I also want to say is I really appreciate the opportunity to be here in this moment. It's a privilege for me. I mean that really sincerely, because it forces me to dig deep also and to present you as my best self. I have to, you count on me for that, and you deserve that. And I have to tell you, it's not the opportunity I want. It's not the opportunity of what I would have preferred. What I would have preferred, right, is to stand in front of you and feel my anxiety and the sweat in my palm and the excitement about what I'm going to tell you, and to see the look on your face and the yawn when I lose your attention, and the question that causes to really kind of, be honest and be present and keeps me honest. That's what I would prefer. And it's not the opportunity I have, right? And that lack of being in one another's presence, right, where we sense each other's vitality, where we can kind of get each other's mood, where we sense, whether we're connecting or not connecting, that's what we all miss. It's what I miss. It's what your campers miss. And, we're all discovering, as we've said before, the limits of, this wonderful technology that we have, because it's not where the magic is. The magic of camp and the magic of all relationship is when we are in each other's presence. And I say this for a few reasons, right? In fact, I call it, even when I deal with the kids that I talk to, which I'm doing online also, there's this absence of presence. And that's what we all miss. And that's where and it's fortunate that it took a virus to, the threat of this pandemic to remind us of what's most important in our lives. And I say it for three reasons. One, I want to make an important point about how you communicate with your own campers and your own camper families, because it's not just sharing information, it's sharing a part of yourself. Deeper communication is about sharing a part of yourself. When I stand up in front of an audience, like I have with all of you many, many times, often at the New England Spring Conference or at a fall conference, I'm sharing not just information, but a part of me, right? I'm invested in this. You're invested in this. And I'm saying this because don't be afraid to share that really vulnerable part of yourself with your families. That's what makes you real to them, right? And it models for them how they're going to have kids. Right? So draw a comparison between what campers are dreaming of right now. They're missing that connection. They're missing that reality. I have lots of kids who are getting bored, with FaceTiming. Who would have ever thought that, teenagers would get bored with FaceTiming, right? But it's going to, in order to, be heard, you're going to have to acknowledge a piece of what your campers will miss if you decide to close. And it's also to emphasize that we have an opportunity here. It may not be the opportunity we want, right? The opportunity I want is to not be looking at a screen right now and the little green light. That's my camera. I want to be with you. Okay, I don't have that opportunity. I still have an opportunity. And so do you, okay? So I want to start by acknowledging what people are experiencing. That's how we communicate more deeply and effectively with one another, right? That is the reality of their inner world. Like everybody experiences experiences differently. It's interesting that when I deal with a family and I talk to, if I see a family in my practice, and I talk to one child, and I talk to another family member, and then I talk to a different family member, I often marvel at how the same, say, episode or situation is experienced so differently by the same members of the same family, right? Because we all have our different inner world, and it's our experience that needs to be validated, right? It's what I mean when I say you have to connect before you redirect. You have to actually connect with people before you give them information, right? Otherwise the information won't transfer, right? And that's essentially what you always do, even without thinking about it, is camp people at camp all the time. And it's what you're going to need to do in the communication that you have with your campers and your families, and your staff, and your vendor, your alumni, if you should decide to close, right? It's how we validate one another. It's like how we have each other show up and feel seen and feel heard, right? Which, as you know, I feel is what people most deeply want, is to feel heard, okay? So another person who's much more famous than I calls this the charity part of effective communication. So let me explain, all right? I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. So all of you know that I live in Boston, right? I think Boston's a wonderful walking city. It's a lovely place. And one of the great assets of Boston, besides the fact that it's a waterfront city, it has a lot of young people, a lot of universities, a lot of teaching hospitals, a lot of music. It's got a lot of wonderful art. It also has a presidential library. It's the John F. Kennedy Library out Bay. And one of the wonderful things about the library is it holds events where people come to speak. And I had the privilege back in 2009 to go to one of those events and to hear somebody named Ted Sorensen come to talk about his experience as a counselor and the speechwriter to John Kennedy. He was the person who wrote a lot of famous lines, which of course he would have told you, Kennedy was really responsible for. But he's the person who, when John Kennedy said in his inaugural speech, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," we all think Ted Sorensen probably wrote that line, right? And when John Kennedy had to fly to Berlin over Russian airspace with a threat of Khrushchev saying he was going to shoot the president down, and the president gets to Berlin in the middle of East German territory, surrounded by Russian jets, and speaks to 100,000 Berliners and says, "Ich bin ein Berliner," which means I'm a Berliner too. We all think Ted Sorensen wrote that line, right? It woke the world up, right? This is a man you want to listen to, right? So he was actually talking about the first ever televised presidential debate between Nixon and Kennedy. It was a great speech. And at the end of the speech, somebody stood up and asked him a question. And he said, "Mr. Sorensen, you've certainly written a lot of speeches in your lifetime, and you've certainly written a lot of papers. Can you tell us what are the hallmarks of a good speech?" And I'm thinking, well, that's a big question. I don't know how he can answer that in like a couple of minutes. Well, to my surprise, Ted Sorensen says, well, actually, yes, there are 4 components to a very good speech. Like, oh, sure, I knew that, right? He goes, charity, clarity, brevity, and levity, right? Now, you have to understand, at the time, Ted Sorensen was 81 years old. He was blind in one eye. He needed a handler to get him on and off the stage, right? He kind of walked with a cane. And by the way, it turned out it was about 1 year before his death. We didn't know that at the time. And this guy was sharp as a tack and crystal clear. He said, "Let me explain to you what I mean by that." He said, "Let's start with charity. When you give a speech, it's important to be charitable to your audience." What does that mean? To acknowledge their good works, to acknowledge their mission. What's their passion, right? What's the passion they bring to their work, right? What is the reality that they are dealing with, right? What is the difference they're trying to make? When you acknowledge people, when you are charitable, that's his word for it. In other words, you are them first. He said that's what lays the groundwork for clarity. This is where you are clear. You make you want to have impact. You don't just want to make people feel good, right? You don't just want to acknowledge their feelings. You do that to be effective and to acknowledge the reality that they're dealing with, so that they will then hear the important thing you want to say. Okay, and that making strong points, right, even if it's hurtful, is not hurtful. It's about being clear, right? And it can move an audience and to action and even energize them, give them direction. So it's important to be clear, and it's important to be brief, right? Don't wear out your audience. Be brief. Get to the point. Make a few points, because if you make a few points clearly and then you stop talking, you don't take away from the most important impact that you want. Don't be your own competitor and reduce the impact of what you want to say. So less is more. And then he said the last element is levity. Now he said, I don't always mean a sense of humor. Certainly certain topics, even incredibly grave, difficult topics, can benefit from a light touch or from a sense of humor. But I mean more than a sense of humor. It doesn't just mean funny. It can mean giving people hope, right? It means leave people with hope. And what I thought about, by the way, when he said that, I was sitting with a camp director, a friend of mine from Alabama, and I turned to him and I said, wow, it seems to me that that's a great way to talk to campers, right? To be charitable, to connect with them, and then, connect before you redirect is where that came from. And my friend turned to me and he said, Bob, I think it's probably a good way to talk to just about anybody. And it made sense. Build on that as a way for you to create a guide for you in terms of how you want to talk to your campers and your families and your staff and your alumni if you decide to close, okay? So with regard to campers, it's going to be important for you to acknowledge what they might be going through, right? They've lost school, right? Suddenly they're out of school. And we all know school is 80% social, right? They're probably not missing the math lessons and the ELA, or maybe even some of their teachers. But they are missing their teachers, it turns out, and they are missing each other, and they miss that, vital connection they have. They're missing not being with their friends. I've had kids tell me every day is the same. There's nothing that I don't know which day it is, right? I want to get outside and I can't. It's boring. I don't know when it's going to end. And it's kind of hard for me to imagine like it's this all the time, right? And maybe you even are going to be dealing with a parent who's lost a job, right? Or they're, as kids, dealing with a parent who's lost a job. I took a pause there because I was concerned that maybe you might have lost my video or my audio. And I, again, apologize for the, internet connection. This is what we all deal with now, the new reality. But you may be dealing with a kid, with a camper who's got a parent who's lost a job, or who's lost a business, right? Or maybe even lost a grandparent or an uncle to the virus and their wish to be at camp. So obviously, the opportunity that I would like to have is the opportunity that you would like to have, which is the opportunity that campers want to have. And what is that? I think it's important to be clear about it and take stock. And I'll explain how to fold it into your communication. Because what campers do at camp is they build relationships, their friendships, and they're nurtured by them, right? They're in a community that supports them, right? Schools don't always support kids, not in the ways that kids actually feel, right? And I think it's partly because we put kids in the company of younger, really interesting, appropriate, caring adults, right? When the kids who are 9 and 10 get to hang out with 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds, at camp is where they do, right? And we know they thrive as a result of that, right? And I'm going through this on purpose, and I'll explain to you in a minute why, right? They also get lost in the flow of camp. That's one of the beautiful things about camp is you lose track of time. I used to joke with counselors and say, the days seem to crawl by and before you know it, it's over. It's like, wait, where did that go, right? How could we be at parent visit? How could we be doing already? Or how could we be doing the Olympics? Wait, what? We're doing final banquet, right? Because we get caught in the flow, and it is flow, right? That sort of energy that we have, that where we lose track of time, we're simply in the moment. That I think is where kids grow and what heals kids. And yes, I think camp is healing, right? And at the end of all of that, campers get to look back at the end of it and say, I made this, I did this myself. This is all mine. It's not my parents', right? It's mine. And that is so fulfilling for kids in terms of their emerging sense of themselves and their autonomy. Now, why am I going through all of this with you? Because it is part of what kids are going to feel the loss of. And I'm going to explain that in just a minute, because you have an opportunity here to help kids with that loss and to understand what that is. When we talk about charity, clarity, brevity, and levity, in your communication, you would normally start with charity, right? Be charitable to your audience. Validate what's going to be lost, what has already been lost. We all ache for camp, right? We all yearn for our friends. We all miss our community, right? And I would even name certain camp-specific traditions that are specific to your camp, right? Like certain things that you do out on the point, out on the lake, up on the hill at this particular site, this particular funny day. Like, we're going to miss all of that. And it's important because when you take stock, what you're really doing is you are reminding people of the richness of camp and what they are going to feel as a loss. That's important. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute. But in this case, I think it's important, if you're going to close for the summer, right, that you, or if you're going to delay even on a shorter season and not start on time, you have to condense your sessions or, forego a couple of sessions. Wherever there is a loss that is impending of any kind, you're going to start with clarity first. In this case, why? Because your camp families and your staff, by the way, are sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for you to tell them what your decision is, okay? You don't need to create a listening or a connection. It's there already, okay? And when you say that, you have to be clear, that your decision is based on children's safety, on that and that of our staff. We had to make this decision. As much as we yearn for Camp 2, we have to make it based on what we feel is what we can guarantee or not guarantee in terms of your child's safety, right? And the safety of everybody at camp, not just your kids, but your staff, your senior staff. Some of you have staff members who are in their late 30s, 40s, teachers, guidance counselors, nurses from school, right? Alumni who keep coming back and being your boys' head counselor, girls' head counselor, program director, assistant director, associate director. And these people are susceptible and more susceptible to the virus. You may have staff members who have underlying issues, right? Underlying and maybe, you can screen them out and create a safe bubble. That may be possible. And if it is, and you feel you can do that, you'll do that based on the information that you get at the time about how to go about doing that, and then decide, is that even feasible for you? But if you decide to close, and again, please don't, judge yourself as, oh, we didn't try hard enough, right? The risk is only something that you can decide for yourself, but you have to base that obviously on safety, on keeping people safe and not wanting kids to they've gotten it down, they take it to their family, to their grandparents, all of that, right? And if we could have done it safely, we would have, knowing the loss that people are going to experience as a result, right? And this is why you trust us. So if you're closing, you say, this is why you have trusted us over the years, because we're going to give you the unvarnished truth as far as it concerns us. And you can even say, look, there may be other camps you hear about that open, and God bless them, and we hope they're successful, and we hope no one, gets sick as a result of it. And it's not something we felt comfortable that we could guarantee. because there are going to be differences, okay? And we're going to give you what we think is the truth, even when it hurts. People rely on you for that, right? So you want to make a simple declarative, meaning the clarity sentence first, right? This is just a sample. I'm not suggesting that I'm going to write for you. We'll all have to do this in your own word because it's going to be you sharing yourself. But it would sound something like, after a lot of soul searching and, real careful deliberation, we've come to the sad conclusion or the realization that we cannot operate camp this summer and keep everybody safe, right? You start as clear as you can, and then you validate what will be lost, right? We know this is going to be hard for our families, our kids. We're all looking forward to it. I think you address it directly to parents, right? If you want to do something later as a video for kids, and I'll talk about that, you can, but for your first communication should be directly to camper parents, right? You want to use collective pronouns. You want to say our community, our place, we, right? Because we are all in this together. You want your camp family to understand they're still your camp family, right? And it is a loss and probably a string of losses, right? And make the distinction between sad and depressed. There's a difference, right? To be sad, you have to have something to have been sad about in the first place, right? All that I went through about how kids create and build relationships that nurture them and create a community that supports them, and that that they have counselors they look up to and actually love, right? And that they feel the sense of autonomy, having created all of that on their own. It's important to acknowledge that, because it is all still there. It's all still real. It's all still part of what camp stands for. You can't take that away from kids when they have it inside. And it is a loss. It is something to be sad about. If you're sad, it means, ironically, that there's a richness there, right? That there's something there that means something to you. And you're giving your campers permission to tap into their family, to tap into that disappointment. The disappointment wouldn't be there if there weren't something meaningful there in the first place to be disappointed about. And that's different than depressed. Depressed is empty. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be some kids who aren't going to be depressed. There are. I'm talking to those kids. But I think you want to be able to validate the loss. And that sounds, I know, probably counterintuitive, or maybe even like it's an oxymoron. And yet it is really about the richness of camp and what camp gives to kids, right? Keep it brief. And I want to be really clear about this. Don't mix in the refund issue. You have to mention it because parents are going to be nervous about money. We're all, unfortunately, having to be concerned about our livelihoods as a result of this. So state your plan to handle refunds and other questions about tuitions a few days, not in this community. You have to say it. Say, we'll be in touch with you maybe in 2 or 3 or 4 days about, tuitions and so on and so forth. But you don't want to get into the details of that in this communication. You want to keep that business about, you want to keep the business piece. It's valid, it's legitimate, needs to be addressed, but you want to keep it separate from this, okay? So refunds by the way, with regard to that, and again, in a separate communication, I think it's best to offer choices, right? Do you want a full refund? Can we keep some of that refund, a percentage of it, and apply it to next year? I think it's fine for you, again, in a separate communication, to let people know, look, we're a business, we're a year-round business, we have to keep the place up, there's maintenance, there are staff people that we have to pay. I think it's fine for you to say that, but again, in a separate communication. And do you want to apply a percentage, all of it or a percentage of it, help us to be able to offer what we, so wonderfully offer your kids, you keep us alive, if you could extend that refund to us, or even donate it to a scholarship fund that you might have. And for those of you who are nonprofits, consider asking your parents to take part of what they've paid you already, and to, make part of that a donation to your nonprofit, because it will keep you alive, right? It will keep you in the position of being able to offer what you offer kids at some point in the future, right? And, call us with questions. I know a camp that well, a nonprofit camp where the director took, virtually, through the phone and whatnot, got their leadership team. They divided up, I think, 250 different camper families. They made personal phone calls and they gave them those choices. And to their surprise, 70% of those families donated a portion of their deposit to the camp, to the organization, which they didn't expect. So, I think that personal touch is important. I don't know what your manpower is, and again, I don't know what your overall, families are, how many you have, but the more that you can make this a personal transaction, the better it is for you in the long run, and the more, again, people feel cared for. And I know, look, it's going to be anxiety provoking for you. That's real, right? Because you're talking about your livelihood. And you may even be talking about the survival of your camp. But I think it's important to try to give parents choices, to do that in a separate communication, and to be as personal about it as you possibly can. Levity in this case is offering hope. Okay, and I'm reminded of a comment that Winston Churchill said in 1940. Frankly, it was in May of 1940, and it was a terrible time. I mean, he wasn't being invaded by a virus. He was about to be, or he thought to be, invaded by the Nazis. The Germans, France had fallen, Belgium had fallen, Poland had fallen, the Netherlands had fallen. The Germans were at the French shore, 26 or whatever miles away it is from Dunkirk to Dover. And, London was about to be bombed for 9 months straight. And Winston Churchill said, it would be foolish to disguise the gravity of the hour. It would still be more foolish to lose heart and courage. So look, I know that you're anxious as camp people. I know that there's a lot at stake. I know that emotions are running high. And you need to remind yourself, okay, not now, but later, right? This is not forever, right? As soon as we can be together safely, we'll do it. And you don't know, you'll get creative. Maybe you can be in the fall, right? Maybe your reunions, I will tell you, there will be pent up demand because kids are going to want to be with their friends. They're going to want to have the promise of camp. So as soon as we can do it safely, right, we'll be in touch throughout the summer. You may even do some summer virtual programming, right? And you want to hear from your campers. Have them send you a letter, right? Campers are beginning to write letters. Who knew, right? And to be in touch with you in ways that you maybe make a quilt, right? It's about that, maintaining that connection. And 2021 will be the best year yet. So it's something I think you need to leave people with hope, right? So keep it brief. Start with your declarative sentence, acknowledge the loss, be brief and leave people with hope. And that's kind of the formula for dealing with your camper families and your campers, right? Now, about the campers who would have been your oldest campers. I'm going to stop for a second because sometimes, again, I apologize if my internet connection has been a little spotty. I'm saying that I think you need to have some special consideration for the campers who would have been your oldest campers this summer, because they're going to miss it even more. Like, oh, this was our summer to be on the top dog, to be on top, to do those your campers get to do. And, you have to address them, I think, even as a separate group. And maybe there's some ways of leaving them with hope. Like maybe you can do a reunion weekend next spring, or they can come to camp for a week. And I don't know what that is. You'll know what that is. But I think you have to address that group of graduating campers, or the ones who would have been graduating, because that is something they've been looking forward to this for an entire year, maybe even for their entire camp career. And now it's being taken away from them, just like for some staff people, graduation, senior year, graduating from college is being taken away. And that's a big deal for those kids. And I think you have to address that separately and leave them with hope, not a promise, hope, right? You can't make a promise, but you can, offer the hope and keep the options open. So, if you're going to do a video, by the way, if you're going to do this in terms of video, again, begin with your declarative statement, right? Consider placing yourself in the video at a spot in camp where you would typically be welcoming incoming campers and families. Where do you typically greet people? Do they get off the bus? Do they come in the gate? Do they meet at the, flagpole? Wherever that is, put yourself there. It makes it real, and it helps with that connection, right? Don't show scenes of empty camp spaces. It's too sad. That's not the vision you want to create. What you want to create, the vision you want to create and have campers hold on to, is the happiest moments, right? Get some stock footage, right? And there are lots of times, right? Showcase some meaningful places at camp with people, kids, counselors in them. So get some footage or some slides, some pictures, some photographs that are happy, that show camp in its best moments, right? You want to leave people with hope. Like when you won a tournament, you got that picture, when there were awards, when there was an assembly, people were excited, when there was color war break, when you were playing an especially exciting game, right? When there was Olympics, when there was, the final, want to put scenes, whether video or stills, into your video that show that happiness, okay? Because that's the hope, and that's important, and you want to keep that vision alive. We are, animals who, for whom symbols are really important, and this is important especially for kids, right? Now, I want to say something about addressing staff, because you need to address your staff probably on the same day, because you know how the grapevine works, but in a separate communication, right? The sooner, by the way, the better. I know many of you are waiting. I think that makes sense. You want to get the best information you can. You want to see if the protocols or the guidelines that, the ACA and CDC come out with are reasonable. Are they, ones you can do? Is it, if you do them, are they going to really, like if we have to all wear masks and stay 6 feet apart and do this testing, is it going to make the camp experience worth it? Those are all decisions only you can make. But the sooner you do, so I understand why you're waiting. On the other hand, your staff, if they aren't coming camp, are going to need to replace that lost income or that lost time, right? So the sooner they know, and I'm saying, mid-May, third week of May is when I think most people are probably trying to decide. But the sooner you do that, the better for your staff. Secondly, follow a similar format as with families, right? The clarity, very straightforward. Here's, after a lot of deliberation, we've come to this sad conclusion, right? And here's why, right? And then the charity. In this case, I think you want to go into more detail with losses that are specific to your staff, or maybe more specific to your staff than your kids. Like what? Many of you have suddenly lost your college community, gone, right? You're not in class anymore. Some of you may have lost your senior year, right? Many of you are not going to experience the pride, the satisfaction of, I did it, walking across that stage with your diploma after 4 years or more of hard work with your family cheering you on, right? That's a loss, and you have to acknowledge that for your staff, right? Some of you may have lost a friend. Some of you have lost a relative. We know 40% of the people who die from this are ages 0 to 45, right? That's what's now coming out of the hospitals. They may have lost a friend, right? Or someone they're close to, or a relative, a grandparent, a grandmother, a grandfather, an uncle. Some of you may have had parents who had a serious close call with this, right? Who've lost a job, a business, right? Who've had the illness and were terribly sick and you didn't know if they were going to pull through, right? Some of you may be scared yourself. Be concerned for you, right? Maybe you lost an internship. Here's what's true. Everybody's going to lose something from this. Everybody. What's going to be different is the nature of that loss. And it's not going to be equal, but everybody's going to have that loss. And it's important for you to acknowledge some of that for your staff, right? And be brief. Again, keep on point, right? The levity piece is, this is about hope in the future, right? Maybe not now, but later. It's not going to be forever. And maybe we'll have a staff reunion. Maybe we'll have a gathering. If we can do it and we feel we can do it, we'll do it safely, right? It's like keeping that family and that hope alive. It's important. And maybe there's plans for virtual camp, right? And you're going to keep them abreast of that as well. So again, the clarity, the charity, the understanding what that loss really means, keeping it brief, and leaving people with hope. Now, I think the other thing you have to supply, or I would recommend that you supply or give as a resource for your parents, are some tips for them about helping them deal with their kids who are going to be dealing with the disappointment of the loss of camp. So if you decide not to run, you want to be able to say at some point, parents, we have some thoughts or some tips for you about things that you might want to keep in mind when you talk to your kids about this, right? Many parents are going to welcome some help on that because, we know parents often want to just make it better. They want to soothe their kids and make it all better. And they can't. They can't make it all better. They can't, wish the virus away. They can't bring back camp if you decide to close. So parents are going to be left with, how do we console or help our kids? And so you need to help parents, first of all, understand they can't make their kids feel better. That's not their job. It's their kids' job, and to make themselves feel better, to figure out how to move forward. Support them in that process, right? It was never the job of parents to take away reality from their kids, right? Yes, kids are younger, you want to protect them, but as they get older, it does them a disservice when you try to blunt reality, right? You can't put your kids in a bubble. So help parents see that the greatest way to help their own children is to help them help their kids put their feelings into words, right? We call that name it to tame it. And by the way, what is that? That's the charity part of smart communication. Why? If you don't name it, so if what kids can't say, they act out, right? What kids can't tell us, they show us. And so we want to help kids with that disappointment, right? Encouraging them to express their feelings, by the way, doesn't preclude parents from also helping them with the lesson that they might take from this. But here's the thing, many parents want to kind of swoop in and, well, it'll be better this year. Well, we'll do this. Okay, that's all valid, and feelings are valid too, right? It's not either or. And I think, unfortunately, there is a split that parents often get into, right? Which is one parent is the emotional kind of representative, and the other parent is we've got, the practical one. And the truth is, neither of those by itself is enough for kids, right? To be effective, right? Neither approach by itself works. It takes both, right? To be effective, you have to be tough and tender. You have to be responsive and help kids with their feelings. And that's not the end. Remember I said and, not but. Many of you will chuckle knowing what I mean by that. You need to be able to connect those two. Yes, this is terrible. Yes, it's a loss. And let kids really say it, right? What are those feelings? Allow you to be there for them. And when the moment is right, okay, what do we do? Again, I paused because I think maybe my internet connection might have been unstable, and I apologize again for that. So allowing kids to express their feelings doesn't preclude parents from saying, okay, how do we move on? What are we going to do? What do we learn from this? Here's, exclusive, unfortunately, parents get into that. So some other points for parents. Nothing about this is normal. That's what I say to kids. Nothing about this is normal. The only thing that's normal about it is the way you feel about it, right? And how do you feel about it? You're probably angry. You're probably sad. You're probably disappointed. You're probably bored. You're probably frustrated, right? All of those things, whatever that is that you're feeling, your feelings don't negate other people's. Your feelings is your reality. And validate that for kids and help parents do that, right? And you also need to be able to say at some point, this is not forever, right? Okay, so maybe not now, but later, and it's going to end. We don't know when, right? It's hard not knowing when, right? And it wouldn't even be surprising if kids were angry at adults. Why don't you fix this? Why did you make this mess happen? Not that we did, but it's kids, we all know kids aren't always realistic about how they experience their feelings. And so, yeah, you might be mad at us because we can't fix it. You're right, we can't fix it. And I don't blame you for being angry. Everybody's angry. We're angry too. So one of the things that I have talked to people about is something called feel, felt, found, which is a little way I remind myself of saying, I can see how you feel. Lots of people have felt that way, feeling that way sometimes. Here's what I've found. And I think that's a nice way of blending both the, openness to emotion and feeling with how do we move on in the practical part and bringing those two things together. Often you have a parent who wants to teach their kids a lesson or get them moving, and then you've got a parent who says, no, but they're too upset. And I think it really takes both of those for a successful communication. So I hope, again, that we can leave our kids and our families and even you with, okay, not now, but later. And it might be hard to see that. It might be hard where we are right now to see how is this going to get better? How are we going to be able to get back to some, sense of normal? And what can we learn from this? But I think it will happen. We just don't know when. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I'm going to we still have a little time. I do have to stop just a couple of minutes before the hour because I actually have somebody that I'm going to get on a therapy appointment with. But I just want to mention the next webinar, which is that if you do decide to run, there are going to be some things that you're going to sort of you're going to see and have to deal with in both your campers and your staff. And I'd like to give you some heads up about that and talk about ways that you can train your staff and train yourself to deal with that if it comes to that.
Thank you, Bob, so much. We have a couple of quick questions if you have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, I do.
Great. One question was how to communicate that hope, especially if we don't know if we will survive. So.
Okay, so that's a great question. So I want to take that in 2 pieces, Kat. So let's talk about if you don't know you're going to. So if you as a camp aren't sure that you can actually survive this and be there next summer, my advice to you is 1 step at a time, right? I think the disappointment has to happen 1 step at a time. So again, so I know that puts you in an awkward position because you don't want to say, okay, but we'll be here next summer because you don't know if you will be. And I think what you say is we're going to promise you that we will be there if we can, in a way. So I guess it's not a promise. It's more, here's what we're going to do if we can, so you're keeping the option open, right? Without promising that you're going to be there next year. And I think, by the way, if you finally decide that you can't, which is obviously an incredibly huge, sad, tragic, outcome, that you can't survive as a business, I think that's a separate communication. I don't think you should load it all on yourself or on your camper families to do that all in one piece.
Great. Thank you. And another question is it okay to sort of put the decision onto the state if the state is putting out guidelines that the camp doesn't think they can meet?
Well, I think there's some finesse in this. I think on the one hand, yes, you say, look, this is what the state has told us that we need to be able to put in place in order to operate safely. And frankly, we can't meet those. We don't have the resources, whether it's we don't have the testing, we can't find the right medical people, we can't get the protective gear, we don't have the space. And if we ran it the way they said we would run it, it wouldn't be camp, it would be weird, it wouldn't be, I think it's fine to reference the state. But if the state gives guidelines and says you can open if you meet these guidelines, then I think you have to be courageous and say, we can't meet those guidelines and we just can't do it. It's not feasible. And again, every camp is going to have different resources and have a different taste, I guess, or a tolerance for risk. Again, I think maybe you've lost. Am I back? I'm back.
You're back. You're back. Yeah. And I think the important thing there probably is also sticking to the brevity that you talked
Yes.
about, not
Yes.
going into the details.
Yeah, I don't think you have. Once you said, here's what we've decided, and here's what we base it on, and yes, we all know, and let's acknowledge the loss, and here's what we want to keep our options open. I think you're done.
And somebody else suggested that perhaps it would be better to say, until the next time we can gather rather than summer 2021.
Sure.
That leaves open the possibility that if a vaccination isn't in place and people feel they can't open in 2021, they have that door open.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that brings up one last point, which I know all of you with one another. And, I think you're all, it's like brainstorming. You all have a depth of experience, and some of you are going to come up with phrases that are much better than anything I could think of, because that's what you do. It's your domain.
Yeah. And I'm just going to there's one last, it's a point rather than a question. A message that somebody has been sharing is to remind campers that camp is more than a place. It's the people, the memories, their growth. It's what you were referring to, but helping them to see that it's more than the place, and it's inside them.
Right. That's great. And by the way, if you, subsequent to your announcement, you put out a short little video here or there about like some memories of camp, and it makes kids cry, that's a good thing, because I want to tell you, if they're crying because there's something rich there. And frankly, you reminded them of exactly what the point that person was making. Camp is inside you, and that's a richness, and that's why you're sad.
Absolutely. Well, we have to let Bob go. Somebody did ask about the slides being shared, and my understanding is that you will be willing to share your slides, Bob.
Yes, I'm willing to share my slides, my slide deck, and I think we've recorded this, and I think you're going to make it available. So I'll let you handle that piece, Kat.
Great. And you're getting a few thank yous. Your counsel is so much appreciated, Bob. We need your help right now, and we're glad that you have been so willing to support us in this process.
No, it's a privilege.
Ron, do you have anything?
Just that we have recorded it, and I will post it as soon as I can on both Facebook and in our members section of our website, along with the PowerPoints from Bob.
Great. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. And if anybody needs anything else, please reach out.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.